Welcome back to the Old Shed Workshop. If this is your first time here, I'm Mike, and I'll invite you to like and subscribe, and please hit the bell for notifications for future videos. I have a center line drawn on this beautiful piece of olive wood. I can line up the center line with the edge of the jig and know that the saw blade is going to be perfect right on that edge. So now I can take my hold down clamps. In fact, I want to come in a little closer with this. You can see the utility of this jig. Now I hold down with the clamp. Make all your final adjustments before you lock everything in place. I bring this over. I know that this end of the line is still going to be lined up exactly with the edge of my jig. This is locked down. Bring my hold down clamp. I'm going to bring this in just a little bit more. Then I'm going to take my hold down clamp and lock it in place. I got to look. It needs to come in a little bit. That looks good. This one looks good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the blade, I'm going to activate my two-stage dust collection system, and I'm going to make the cut. All right, let's cut it. Let the blade stop completely before you do anything. Okay, we'll pull this back, undo the hold down clamps. Now you've got a workpiece that has two uneven surfaces. You have nothing to run against the fence on the table saw. Here's the two pieces. Now these two pieces are going to end up like this. This is going to create a rivet table that's going to be a cribbage board. I have this beautiful olive wood on my bench now. You can still see the red line, which was my cut line on my jig. The next part of the process is I need to clean up all the edges. To do that, I'm going to use an abrasive wheel, a fine wire wheel on a Dremel, and some picks. You'll be able to see that there are some imperfections in here that I'm going to need to address. There's a piece here sticking up that's going to need to be glued back in place. There's a piece here that wants to break off. If that breaks off, you're going to see exposed raw wood. So I'll have to address that, get that glued back in place, and get this all cleaned up before I can seal the edges with some resin. The next thing I'm going to do is plane it and start getting the edges all cleaned up. I have my planer set up so that I can take off just a minimal amount of this beautiful wood, just enough to get the saw marks off. So I'm going to run those through. I've planed both pieces, which you remember is actually one piece. So each piece has to go through the planer exactly the same amount of times, same depths. And I advanced the planer probably about a 64th or 128th of an inch each time I advanced the blades. Now, both sides have a nice finish, just enough to take off the saw marks. You can see the beauty in this wood starting to come out. There's a little bit of saw marks here from the original cut. That'll be the outside. This will be this upside down. I'll be able to sand that out in the sanding process. So now I'm going to get on to the process of cleaning up all the live edge, and then I'll get back with you. Just to give you a good look at the pieces with live edge side sealed. I took a little bit of epoxy resin and sealed these edges. The last thing you want to do is end up with an air bubble that's trapped in those little nooks and crannies in the live edge. And then when you pour your epoxy resin, that little air bubble will suddenly rear its ugly head. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a tint of red in this. That's because the epoxy resin I'm going to use is a garnet red pearl. So this is the second coat on the edges. I let this sit for several days before I put it in the mold and begin the pour. I have my mold all set up. I've caulked all the inside edge. I've made sure to tape up all the seams before caulking. And I have all the clamps in place. I'm ready to make my first pour. I just got the rest of these clamps in. I had to wait until they arrived. I didn't have enough. But on a bar clamp, you can add these little accessories for a bar clamp, and it gives you a downward force to hold your pieces in place. Those are from Rockler. They're really nice. They're a little spendy, but they're really nice to give you that downward pressure to hold your work pieces in place. So I'm going to start my pour here. A couple of minutes. I got to keep stirring. I'm using a garnet red and pure white pearl. Okay, I'm going to start my first pour. Everything's level. I checked it in all directions. You want to make sure you do that before you start a pour. You'll have all your material heading to one place. I know I'm going to need a second pour. I don't happen to have a real large container at hand, so I know I'm going to have to pour some more. All right, let me mix up another batch. I have all my pours done. The level of my resin is just slightly above my work pieces now. So the next part of the process is I'm going to, over the next several hours, kind of move the resin a little bit to make sure I get a nice distribution of the pearl. This will start to settle out over time. That's why it becomes necessary to make sure that all the pearl doesn't just settle. And with all the bubbles that come to the top, I'm not worried about bubbles coming out of the live edge because I sealed the live edges. Now I'll just take a torch, and anytime bubbles start to come up, I'll just hit them with the torch. That's all it takes. The bubbles will continue to come up as the resin settles down in. So I'll stay on this probably for the next 3 or 4 hours, continuing to move the pearl and take care of any bubbles. I've taken the clamps off and I'm ready to pop the workpiece out of the mold. You can hear it start to break loose. There it is. Looks great. No bubbles. I'm ready to start planing the piece. This has to be done in very, very slight advances of the blades. This is the bottom of the workpiece. This is the part that was in the mold. So I'm going to make a few adjustments, get things set up, and start to plane. Okay, I've finished planing. You can see it looks pretty good now. This is the back. You also may have noticed that in the planing process, I put on a pair of gloves. These edges are very sharp. You don't want to get cut with that. Gloves are the order of the day. This is the front. I got a very slight depression there. But since I'm right at the beginning of sanding, I'm pretty sure I can get that out in the sanding process. So far, I've sanded with 150, 180, 220, and 320. From here on out, I'll be going to wet sanding, starting with 400. Just to give you a quick look, give you an idea, you'll see this resin start to wake right up once I begin the wet sanding. I have this set of sanding abrasives that I found on Amazon. I'll put a link down below. They fit palm sander. So I'm going to start with 400. I have 6, 8, 1,000, 1,200. I think I go up to 2,000 or 2,500. So I'll put that link below. I've sanded out my piece as far as I can go with sandpaper. After the dry sandpaper, I went to wet sanding. I went from 400 to 600, 800, 1,000, 1,500, and finishing up with 2,000. The next step is going to be a polishing step. I have these buffing pads that I found on Amazon. I'll put a link below. They have 3 stages. The green one is for cutting, the yellow one is for polishing, and the black one is for finishing. For my purposes, I'm going to be using the black one. These pads very conveniently fit on a standard 5-inch palm sander. That's the beauty of them. You don't have to have a dedicated buffer. Finish out the epoxy resin. I'm going to be using this product from 3M. It's called Ultra Fine Machine Polish. And this is the same polish that I used to finish my rivet table. I'll put a link up above to the rivet table so you can see that process. I'm ready to square up the ends of the work. I have it clamped down to my table saw sled. And I'm ready to make the cut. I'm ready to square up the other end where the epoxy resin is. Now I'm ready to square up the sides on the table saw. I've determined that this side gives me a square edge on my sled. So I'm going to use this side up against the table saw fence first. I'm ready to square up the long sides of the workpiece. And so that I don't scuff up the epoxy resin, I've put a piece of paper on the back side. And I'm ready to cut the first side. Always make sure you push your workpiece all the way through the blade. In other words, don't stop when you hit the edge and you've finished your cut. Push your workpiece all the way through so you don't get one of those little half moons that you're going to have to end up dealing with and sanding and a lot more work to have to get it nice and smooth. Okay, let's do the other side. I'm ready to cut the second side. All right, I'll get everything cleaned up. We'll put some finish on. I have my router all set up with a chamfer bit. I'm going to go around and just break this sharp edge all the way around. Just make sure to keep it moving, going along the epoxy. You don't want to go too slow and have the epoxy resin start to melt. Just keep it moving nice and even. I'm ready to turn my workpiece over to prevent the workpiece from sliding on the bench. I use these tri-grips, little bench grips. They're nice. You can put them down or you can put them up if you're painting and you just want the small point touching your workpiece. So you can use a router with these and your workpiece won't slip. I'm going to get ready to do the other side. I'm ready to start putting finish on now. The product I use is Osmo Pollux oil. for wood floors and furniture, natural oil wax based finish. I really like this finish. It's the same finish I used on my river table. And a little bit of this goes a long way. So I'll show you how I apply it. Take one of these small cups. You don't need much. First thing I want to do is I want to cover these edges. This is where you really see the work come to life. And just use this type of an applicator to spread it around, and then I'll buff it out. I'll show you the buffing pad I'm going to use. I found these on Amazon. They're a wool buffing pad. I'll put a link below, just like with the foam pads. And there's also a link, if you were to go to my website, under my tools and supplies, you'll see these as well. It will drip, so make sure you get all your edges. I just use a microfiber cloth to do the edges. Don't forget, a little bit goes a long way with this stuff. When I flip it over the other side, I'll hit these edges again. You want to make sure you don't have drips that go over to the other side, because you don't want the finish to start to solidify without being buffed out. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. You're actually buffing the finish into the wood. And what you don't want to do is leave marks or leave swirls in the epoxy resin. So you have to finish with a stroke with the palm sander that goes right off your workpiece. Now I'll buff it in. These are the pads. They're very convenient, and they're designed to fit right on a 5-inch palm sander. The finish will seek its own level, but what you don't want to do is stop and leave swirl marks on the epoxy resin. You want it to be able to just lay out on its own and seek its own level. Okay, put a little bit on this side. It's a very hard finish when it dries. Just spread it out nice and evenly. Check your edges. One thing you don't want to do, it will tend to drip. You don't want to reach under and get your drip from the other side, because what can happen is you'll leave a swipe mark on the other side. You don't want that, because once that hardens, there's no changing it. Continue to check your edges as you work so that you don't get any drips. Looks beautiful. Now that's it. I don't want to touch it anymore from here. I want to let it just seek its own level and begin to dry on its own. I'm ready to lay out the center of the workpiece, and I want to share with you how I do this. It's kind of a process. The first thing I did is I tried to lay out the center line and used a type of a grease pencil to make my center line. That made a mark in the finish on the epoxy resin. I had to sand it back out and refinish it to get it back to where I wanted it. The next thing I did was, rather than leave a pencil mark, I put a piece of painter's tape down the rough center. So I knew that when I found my center, it would be on the painter's tape. Yet again, that made a mark in the finish on the epoxy resin. Once again, I had to go through a procedure to try to get that cleaned up and refinished. The alternative to that is to put a piece of paper on top. I also have a piece of paper on the bottom. You can see a little piece here. That's just to prevent me from scuffing the epoxy resin on the back side. In order to do this is a process that I use to make it easy to find the center of a piece with unusual measurements. For example, the width of this piece in imperial measure is from the outside. Remember, I've already cut the 45-degree chamfer to break the hard edge on the outside edges of the workpiece. From the outside edge to outside edge, I'm 11 and 11/16. From the top of the chamfer, I'm 11 and 9/16. These aren't convenient measurements that are easily divisible by 2. I also have centimeters on this scale. From outside to outside, I'm at 29/7. From the inside of the chamfer to the inside of the chamfer, I'm at 28/8. It's a little more difficult, whether it's imperial measure or in metric measure, to try to find a measurement that's easily divisible by 2. So this is what I do. I put my zero mark. Doesn't matter if you're using metric measure or imperial measure, but I've decided to put my starting line, which is not at the edge of this scale, be careful of that, on the inside edge, the top of the chamfer. On this side, I'm going to go to a number that's easily divisible by 2. So if I bring this down to 12, make sure I haven't moved. Keep checking your measurements. You're going to measure it 42 times and mark it. I'm at the 0 mark here. I'm at 12 here. 6. You put your mark at 6. It's easily divisible by 2. There's your center mark. I come up here. I do it again. I put my 0 mark on the edge. You can do this at 13, 14, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. As long as you can divide it by 2. I put the 0 mark on the top of the chamfer. I come down to 12, and I get right on my measurement. I put my mark at 6. Then, using the scale, I draw my line. And one thing I always do, you may have seen this in other videos, I put my pencil on my pencil mark. I bring the scale to the mark. Come down here to my other mark. Bring the scale to the mark. Check it. Bring the scale to the mark. Strike your line, and you're always going to be straight. Sometimes if you try to bring the scale to your marks and then strike the pencil line, you're off. If you bring the scale right to the pencil, you're going to be right on your mark every time. I'm ready to start the process of drilling the holes with the template. And in order to do that, having my center line here, I made a center line on the template and continue the center line here. I took this square, made sure I'm square this way. I took my framing square to make sure that I'm square this way. And my template is square on the x-axis and the y-axis. That's all you need to do once you have the determination of where you want to lay out your board. What I did was took the templates and laid them out on a piece of paper to see where I was going to end up overall positioning the board on my workpiece. And I came up with this location. Once you determine where you want it on your workpiece, all you have to do is square it up and you can start drilling your holes. I'm just about to finish the last series of holes. I had to switch templates from this template to the template with the rounded end. Time to take the protective paper off and look at the finished product. That's the last of the holes. Looks good. Now just time for a little cleanup. I've taken off the protective paper and cleaned up the top of the workpiece. Now it's time for me to route out the recess in the workpiece where the deck of cards will be mounted. In order to do that, I've mounted a router bit in my router with a guide bushing that'll run along the inside of my jig. I'm going to make the first pass. I've advanced the depth of the router bit just slightly, and I'm ready to make my second pass. Always make sure that you let your router stop completely before moving it. You don't want to damage your jig, and you don't want to damage your workpiece. This olive wood compacts really tightly with the heat as you're routing, so it's important to loosen it up. I just use a pick, and I'll vacuum this out before I advance each additional step. Let me get that done. I've reached the depth that I wanted to achieve to recess the deck of cards into my finished cribbage board. Now what I'm going to do is take it over to the drill press, where I'll put a Forstner bit into the drill press, and I'll hog out the rest of this material to get it down to the level that I've already cut to set the depth that I want the deck of cards at. While I'm there, I'll also change the bit and bore the hole for the tin that'll hold the pegs. I had a little problem before I started cutting the felt for the recesses. My microphone died. So I took the time to flip the workpiece over, and I put my logo on the back. And I wanted to take a moment to show you the reason I put the paper on the back. If you look at that epoxy resin, no scuffs, no scratches. So take the time to do that. I'll flip it over and show you how the front looks. Here's the finished piece. The last thing I wanted to do was get the felt in. So I took the time to do that while I was waiting for the microphone to charge back up. So deck of cards goes here, and all the pegs go here. Again, please take a look at all the links down below. As an Amazon affiliate, I make a very small commission if you use my links to go to Amazon if you're interested in any of those products. Thanks for watching through this project. It's been great fun, and I'll see you on the next one.